Right. Thank you, Graham, for joining me. Um,
But
so, how are you coping with lockdown then? How's it going?
lockdown, I think, is hard for everybody in so many different ways. Those people that aren't able to work maybe have a bit too much time to think, which can be a good thing, but also can have negative effect. I think some will probably see it that, certainly in the first lockdown, that it was a bit of a holiday and it was a bit of a jolly. Those certainly that were, furloughed and stuff, they were yeah, probably delighted. But I think even they now have got to the stage where it's like, I'm bored with this, want to go back to work. For me personally, I've kind of stayed working to an extent, but not to what I would have done. And last summer, I lost a lot of my work in live events with crowds. Obviously, the stock car stuff continued last year. We carried on. Obviously, we started up Spedeworth TV, which has proved quite popular. So I'm doing a lot of recording on that. But of course, we've had to stop being able to go and record with people. So we're doing a lot of that from home. But I think there is that element of boredom and of wanting to get back to normality, which I think is the case for everybody. But I think it affects everybody in different ways. A lot of people that I know that are single are upset that they're on their own. Some people that are in couples or with families, they want the opposite. They want some time alone, so you can't win. So I think it affects people in different ways. But for me personally, I've been okay, but I just now want to get back to regular life and some sort of normality.
But you've been still busy over the last year, because it sounds like you're still doing a lot of work. Still keeping yourself busy.
Absolutely. Basically, I'm lucky that I work in different sports and different areas, some of which have continued, some of which have continued without crowds. Therefore, some I've carried on working, some I haven't. And for the part August to Christmas time last year, I was working fairly regularly. I wasn't doing everything. But yeah, I was quite busy. But to be honest with you, it's been the success of Spedeworth TV in the last year that has kind of meant that we've kept that going. We've sourced that as a massive thing for stock car fans, because for a lot of them, they've not been able to go racing. Obviously, a lot of drivers have been racing, but obviously we're coming up to 5 months without any racing, which in the oval racing world is almost unheard of, because although obviously things quieten down over the winter, there are still a couple of meetings that take place a month. And I just think everybody's itching to get back, but it's been difficult because obviously you've also got people that have had to be very careful, A, because of their age, or B, because of some sort of illness that they can't actually risk going. So the TV side and them still being able to watch it and be part of it, I think has been a massive thing. And obviously it's been good for me, because I've been able to centre my attention on that, and obviously have thoroughly enjoyed doing that.
So over the last year, have you commentated at any events with no crowd? What was it like for you as in your role? What's it like doing that with no one there?
Well, it does depend on the event, because some events that you do, I've always been of the assumption that if you're doing a job in front of 10 people, you do the same job if you're in front of 100,000 people. And depending on some of the situations where you work, the area that you work from, you're in your own box, or you're in your own suite, or you're in your own studio or room, whatever it may be. And actually, you're not really aware of the crowd. And, when it comes to cricket, if I'm doing a test match at Lords where there might be 30 odd thousand people there, or any international ground, you're not thinking, oh, I wonder how many people are in today. Obviously, you get the natural atmosphere and you get the reaction. And the same with motor racing. There is that buzz of the crowd, there is that reaction, there is the fact that it's a bit more theatre. And I think we've seen from football that if there's one bad thing to come from the football carrying on, it's that it appears that quite a few games now have just turned into training matches, and there's not the intensity. I mean, we've just had the FA Cup quarterfinals, and a couple of those games, if you'd have said they were FA Cup quarterfinals, you wouldn't have believed it, because it just didn't have the bite. And that's the thing. I did last summer in cricket. I did two test matches that were played with no crowd, where I still did my normal job. But they only did that for two. I mean, we were unfortunate in cricket. They didn't feel it was necessary to have that. Whereas obviously most of the football grounds, the rugby grounds, they've carried on having the ground announcers, music, presentation. So I did do a couple, but again, because I've done cricket for 20 years and I've done games in the county championship, I've done test matches, it didn't affect me too badly because, as I say, it never bothers me the crowd size. You just kind of do the job. I have to say, though, it was a little bit surreal knowing that there was nobody there. And, you know, even more weird for the players. But I guess as time goes on, they've got used to it. In the stock car world, we did a meeting behind closed doors at Aldershot, which was for TV, which obviously I worked at, which was a bit strange. It was first meeting back. And then obviously the crowds returned and on a reduced basis. And some of those meetings, because they were domestic meetings, you got a similar crowd to what you'd have got anyway, so you didn't really notice it. But in the cricket, it was very weird. But for me, because of the way I've worked and the way I work in it, it didn't actually affect me doing the job as such.
Do you think that the motor racing suffers as much without a crowd compared to football? Because obviously with the racing, you've got the noise that helps to generate a little bit of atmosphere. Whereas at the football, when you're watching it with no added crowd noise, it's just so flat.
Yeah, I think obviously the big difference with the racing is once drivers are in their cars, for them personally, you know, you talk to drivers and you talk about memorable events where drivers during races have mentioned that they've heard the roar of the crowd. They are quite rare. You're talking National Hot Rod World Finals, you're talking Speed Weekends, Banger World Finals, maybe the old days of Wimbledon. So I think for stock cars, for the actual drivers themselves, I don't think it probably makes that much difference. I think a lot of drivers, you know, have said they get a buzz out of racing in front of large crowds. But obviously they are meetings, you know, these days, you know, if you look at the stock car calendar, there are a lot of meetings, domestic meetings, and in those meetings, the crowds are fine, but they're not packed. So actually, to not see too many more people around the terraces, I don't think it affects that. I think as a show, and I think as a presentation, I think it affects things badly because of that buzz. But the one thing, whenever you do an event on, you know, whatever it may be, you never get the same atmosphere at home as you do being there. You know, I've done events over the years where the atmosphere in the stadium or in the arena is amazing, and when you watch it back, you don't get half of that buzz. Mm-hmm. So there's always something lost by not being there as a spectator. But the other equivalent of that is people that love stock car racing. You know, if you give them the option, do they want to watch live racing from home or be there? Yeah, of course they want to be there, but it's not a bad second place to be able to watch it from your living room, you know.
Mm. As a commentator, what is the best race you've seen at Vauxhall? Not just for the race itself, but for atmosphere. I mean, I remember being there for, if you remember John Christie, I think it was the Nick Thomas Memorial Trophy, and he was coming right round. I remember how much everyone wanted him to win that race and how much extra that added to the race, and how much of an extra buzz does that give you as a commentator when watching it?
Yeah, I think Speed Weekends are probably, for me, the best, and that normally involves National Hot Rods. I think there are 3 or 4 races that spring to mind. It's very difficult, actually, because there's so many races over the years that you've commentated on. But I think all you're aware of when you're actually commentating on those races is that you're aware, you know, when there's a good race developing, and you're aware of your role to try and add to that. And that's a great job of a commentator. I remember one of the first years back in '88 with George Polly and Phil White, the crowd that year, who were absolutely sodden. It was horrendous weather. And George Polly had won it in '87 and had driven the most amazing race from well down the grid to catch Phil White, who got away at the front. and Polly made up a ridiculous amount of ground, but he never quite managed to get past. But that's seen as many as one of the greatest national hot rod races of all time, if not the best. You know, you mentioned John Christie there in the Nick Thomas race, which was very special.
Into turn, he comes out of Maxwell in car number 76, making a move on the 95 car there. 95 Gary Murray drops back into fourth. And he's coming back again, Murray. He wants that spot back as they come back past us. It's Paul Frost, 316. Could this be a first win for the Gin-Eaters this weekend? Well, let's see. Good few laps to go yet. Frost 339 in second. 76 Maxwell third. Car number 95, Gary. Third place for 76. Oh, it comes in on the inside of Christie once again. Christie has a great run of speed there. He's in danger. He's using the outside groove. He's making it work. Oh, maybe he's caught the curve. Dives back to the inside. What a move by John Christie. He goes third place. Awesome driving. 95 Gavin Murray, your leader. 316. Paul Frost in second. This one's turning into the race of the weekend, isn't it? As they come out of turn number 4. John Christie in third. Car number 115. Chris Head in fourth. In fifth place is Alan Maxwell, 76.
You know, you had Roger Peck winning the world final, local man to Ipswich, and he drove brilliantly around the outside. And when you watch the footage back of that, the crowd responding.
They're all away then. Ricky Hunt dives in front of Ormond Christie from the line. There's a little bit of a problem at the end of the home straight involving John Stewart. He's off and possibly out. Martin Lawrence is off but back in on the back straight. John Stewart is about to rejoin, which he does. But what chance has he got from there? We will have to see as the race develops. We'll have a Black Cross Mr. Start at 471, Steve Skidmore.
And then the two other great races involving, you know, Andy Stewart with Donut just missing out to the late great Ormond Christie in the late 90s. And then the same driver 10 years on battling it out with Carl Boardley. And
that was my next one I was about to say, yeah.
Well, back in the front, the leader is already into the traffic, and the first car he sees is going to put one lap down there. Is Ken Marriott in car number 2. Ken from Buxton in Derbyshire, still running in his Vauxhall Corsa, and he goes one lap down. 41, Boardley, the leader. Now John Christie's going to find a way past two cars. Andy Stewart going well in third place in car number 198, so 170. Steve Thompson back there in fourth. 271 in fifth place. Neil Stimson. 142. Mike Reardon is back there in sixth. In seventh place now is car number 59, Simon Bentley in the Mitsubishi Colt. Bentley goes into the turn. Ricky Hunt's had a scare in the first attempt to run this race, of course, at 6:39. He's back there in eighth place and going well.
You know, and all those races. And I think, so national hot rods are very special at Vauxhall, you know, and there's so many races I can remember where, you know, you have great finishes, and the classic is, and sometimes the better races are the races that are only heats, or they might be not as important as a major championship. But, you know, at the end of the night, you say, Christ, that was a really, really good race. But, you know, a few months on, you're not necessarily going to remember it because it didn't have a title on it. But yeah, I mean, Ipswich is a great little venue. It's a great stadium, and I've been lucky enough to sort of see and be part of some great races over the years. You know,
we sort of touched on it already, but the two big events, obviously at Vauxhall, are National Bang or Final, Speed Weekend. Which do you prefer to commentate at for? Well, mostly atmosphere, I suppose, but which event do you prefer?
Two events, well, they're both very, very special. It's easy for me because Speed Weekend is my favourite meeting of the year. And there's lots of reasons for that, mainly because I think there's so many different formulas there, there's so many drivers there, which so often are friends that you get to see, and some you only get to see once or twice a year. So, that it's easy for me.
Back in front, he may have lost the lead for literally a second, but Casey was there in the nick of time for headlands. Meanwhile, drama way to our right as Sean goes round in 1.52 and Taylor will have to come back. Meanwhile, Christie's going for another run up the inside. Drivers talking about racing lines. We'll see where the best place to be is as the race goes on. Over 75 laps, but Christie this time has got it. So John Christie takes up the running on lap number 7. 9.16 on new leader. 1.15. Simpson is fine. He's up to third. There's a bit of drama further down. Willie Hardy in 72 involved in that down on the turn. And problems here for Carl Waller Barrett in 1.62. And 9.61's not taken to these conditions at all. And he's gone over on the King Camps bend. Here we go then towards us again. We have 99 pulling up here on the home straight. He has gone minus some bumper work. That is Wayne Lee. Meanwhile, drama. Simpson is gone. Keith Martin is gone. And 303 and 72 were hooked up.
Bangor World Final is a very special night. Probably not the same as it used to be at Wimbledon, but Wimbledon was a very different stadium to Ipswich in the fact that it was very much enclosed. The capacity there full, and the atmosphere was a great cauldron, and Ipswich has become a great venue for the Bangor World, but mainly for different reasons, and that's a great event. I just think it's a different type of atmosphere. It's a racing audience there for Speed Weekend. National Bangor crowd are a very different crowd, and they will solely watch National Bangers, and they'll go around. And the other thing as well, National Banger fans aren't interested in a bit of entertainment. They're not interested in the show really. They're just interested in seeing drivers, their favourites, smash, race, win, end in a first bend pile up. I always say it's very difficult to actually, I tend to do a lot of National Banger meetings, and people ask me, was it any good? And sometimes I struggle to answer, because actually describing what a good National Banger meeting is actually hard, because my idea of that is you get a couple of really decent crashes, you get a couple of real good talking point incidents, but actually there's some good racing as well, and you get a good finish, and that's the ideal race for me.
The 2019 National Unlimited CC Banger Championship of the World final is underway here at Ipswich. It's Charlie King who's made a great start going down the back straight. Coming around turn number 3 on lap number 1, there's action around the raceway as you might expect with this massive field of cars. The fireworks go off. Charlie King leads in car number 204. He's made a great start, drawing grid position at number 1 in the public draw. Red. We have red flags. The world final is being stopped.
But I think to answer the original question, it's easy for me. Speed Weekend is my favourite weekend of the year. I always enjoy that. And, I think the first time that we get to do a full Speed Weekend after all this is over, it's going to be a very special weekend.
Pretty obvious question, but would these events be the same without spectators? And how much do they add to the weekend spectacle?
Speed Weekend is easy. Speed Weekend, if you can't do it with a crowd, it just wouldn't be the same. It's Speed Weekend. Lots of discussions this year. What's gonna happen? It's July. We should be back to normal. I don't actually believe that will be the case, but that's only my opinion. But the racing is still important. It's important to the drivers. It's important to the people. But I think on events like Speed Weekend, and not just Ipswich Speed Weekend, there are other racing weekends around, about the calendar. It's about the social side. It's about people having fun. It's about the atmosphere. That is different. Drivers I don't think drivers would have much fun racing Speed Weekend without a crowd. I just think it'd be a waste of time. I think if it got to that, in my opinion, I think what should happen is that it would be made into a one-day event. These, we can't have another year without a National Hot Rod World Final. So, let's run it. Let's then have a proper one-day meeting where the National Hot Rods, are there on the Sunday. If they have to do qualifying on the Saturday, they do, or the hot laps on the Saturday, that's fine. But the Sunday, it's made a one-day meeting, and it's a really good one-day meeting. But
how would that change it though for you? How different would that feel doing it like that after all these years of it being that way, 2 days?
I think it just comes to a time where I think that would be extreme. I just think that my answer to that would be, I don't think, it's not great, it's not ideal, but if the event has to take place and everybody wants to see a world final, if it had to be run with a restricted crowd, therefore it would probably be shown on telly, that you kind of just say, we've got, you've just got to go with it. You can't change it. We either do that or you don't do anything. And, I think this year it's important that we do, it does go ahead, and I think it will go ahead. But I just think there are certain events where crowd is massively important. There are some promotions talking about running meetings behind closed doors that don't have the facility to show on live TV. Now, if that's domestic meetings and it's drivers getting important practice and it's them getting their racing, that's okay. But that's just domestic racing. Whereas when it comes to big titles, big championships, that's a different kettle of fish, and they need to be seen. It's different promotions. Ideal world, Speed Weekend runs with a full crowd, and we can go back to normal. If it's restricted, depending on how much it's restricted, I think they'd probably have to look at the format of it. But let's hope we don't get to that.
So, give us some insight into how Speedworth have been affected by COVID. What's it done to them? How bad have the impacts been?
I think the biggest problem is, which a lot of people don't realise, is obviously that depending on the track, Speedworth pay for the stadiums they use. Speedworth obviously have a lot of stadiums up and down the country, from Arlington in the south and Eastbourne to Aldershot to Northampton to Ipswich to Yarmouth to Mildenhall, and then there's the other Midlands track at Hensford. So you've got all these tracks. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is that Speedworth are paying rent in a lot of those places to race there. Some of the stadiums have been very helpful and helped them out and said, okay, look, we'll knock it on the head with the rent, you don't have to pay it. They've carried on. So that's been a big factor. So obviously if Speedworth aren't running meetings, they're not having people through the gate. What that's then meant is they've looked at the policy of drivers paying to race, which to start with certainly upset a lot of drivers, because obviously they're already paying an awful lot of money for their cars and their parts, fuel, diesel to get to meetings, etc., etc. And for some, they can't actually afford that further money. So you can understand that for some drivers who are lucky enough to have sponsors or good backgrounds or lucky backgrounds behind them, it's not an issue. But that was kind of the problem, because Speedworth obviously is a business and it has to make money, or not necessarily make money in these times, but obviously not cost money. Speedworth have got regular staff that work in the office on a day-to-day basis. Obviously their wages need paying, etc. So like any business, there is an issue with not having people through the gate. And obviously last year, once we went back to racing with restrictions, you got 1,000 people through the gate. For argument's sake, it may have been a few more at some venues, it may have been a few less. But again, Speedworth relies on 3 or 4 big meetings a year that pay for that make up for the weaknesses elsewhere. And we've already mentioned Speed Weekend, Bangor World Final. some of the Banger World Series rounds, European weekend, national weekend, they're all events where they get a capacity crowd, and obviously that's where they make the money, because there are a good few meetings a year that don't make money and lose money. So overall it averages out. So obviously if you don't get to run those meetings, the company's not making any money. And as I said, I think the point being, it's not the concern if it's not making any money, but if it's losing a huge amount, like businesses on the high street. So many have struggled, sadly gone under in these difficult times. So Spedeworth running a business. So Spedeworth have had to look at ways to try it and say, right, okay, we need to make this money, et cetera. And to start with, that was drivers paying to race. There were times where meetings admission fees had to go up, which again, it's one of those things. It's unfair, but it's a difficult scenario. Trying to keep everybody happy. What's the alternative? In 3 years, we haven't got racing to go to, and I think that's kind of that's the way that people have to look at it. Drivers. There were a few drivers that complained about paying to race. Okay, that's fine, but what's the alternative? In 2-3 years, you haven't got tracks to race on. So very difficult trying to keep everybody happy, like all these things. But I think it's been very tough for Spedeworth. I think it's been tough for everybody, and it's just trying to put something together to keep things going, and get to that light at the end of the tunnel. That's the key. But the other thing with Spedeworth, they were reliant on councils. Councils are the big thing, because a lot of the time it's down to the council in that area of the track whether they race.
Especially at Vauxhall, isn't it?
That's right, exactly. Absolutely, and that's the thing. Vauxhall was a massive one. And some of these other venues that host other events like Speedway or Greyhounds or markets, those are all things that have an effect on whether or not they can reopen, because for the stadium, or for the council to allow that stadium to open, they've kind of got to allow all those things at the stadium to take place for them to reopen. So lots of things, as ever, when in these things, there's so much behind the scenes that people don't realise as to why things are done, why practice days or meetings behind closed doors are at certain venues. But 9 times out of 10, there is a reason that's kind of out of the promotion's hands. So.
Well, there's so many people that are very passionate about short oval racing. Give us an insight into how much, for people who don't know, how much it does mean to people going to these race events.
Yeah, I think people get it in their blood very early on. I think if you look at an entry list from 2019. And look at an entry list of 2005 and probably 1990, you'll see the same name with a different first name, obviously, because it's a generational thing, and people get it in their blood very early on. People love racing. It's quite obvious. So many people love racing a car. Some people would love to be in Formula One. Some would love to be in rallycross. So some would like to be in touring cars, some would like to be in a banger. You've got that crash element. And I think, you only have to look at entry lists. You only have to look at crowds up and down the land each week. Sometimes across different promotions, you might get 10, 15 meetings a weekend. And, you can guarantee that most of those meetings will have full amounts of cars or enough cars to provide some great racing and great entertainment. If you're a spectator, once you go along, if you get the bug, you get your favourites, you get your favourite formula, you just get addicted to it, and people love it, and it's part of their life. People spend weekends, whether you're racers, whether you're officials or spectators, travelling the country, going to the racing wherever it may be, whether it's in Ipswich, whether it's up in Scotland, whether it's over in Ireland, whether it's down south, wherever. There's always something, and people just love it. And when you see some of the racing that gets put on, you can understand why, because, you know, most of it is great to watch.
Tony Bryant in 511 is slow down the back straight. He'll be another retirement. We've lost Rob Greer in 300, and also the 345 machine. We're 4 abreast up the home straight. Surely that won't get round the scoreboard bend without incident. But they somehow managed to, although 1-2-1 at the back end of it. 174 nearly up and over with 43 Mark Lammas. He's almost up and over again, and now there is one up, and it will be a red flag, Mr. Starter, please.
And it's relatively priced in comparison to other markets, you know, of the modern day. So, but I think the thing which people would never get is how so many people have their families, their dad raced, you know, they've gone as a kid, and 30 years later, there they are, having done junior formulas, having done, you know, another formula, and then probably finished up in a third formula. So it's part of people's blood, and they absolutely love it. And if you've never been, give it a chance, because, you know, if you like speed, crashing, you'll love it. Whether it's national hot rods and speed, or bangers, or somewhere in between with super stocks and stock cars, there's something for everybody.
And what about you, Graham? Because I know, you know, you've been going long before you were commentator. What got you into it?
Again, just because my family were involved. My dad was a marshal. My mum had worked in the offices. Even my sister worked at one point. So I started going from a kid. I remember, funny enough, that race that I spoke about between Polly and White, which was 88. I'd have been 9. I remember the first couple of races I actually physically remember were from 88. And I've kind of been involved since. And that was, you know, I did a few little jobs when I was growing up, from scoreboard to marking results on boards, and just being involved in the environment. And, you know, I was fortunate to kind of slip into things when I was 18, 19. So I was very, very young when I started broadcasting and commentating, and I've kind of stuck with it ever since. And, you know, the stock car racing, you know, one thing in racing, whether you're a driver, whether you're official, you are there because you love it. You know, yes, you get paid. Yes, there is a small amount of money in it, but in comparison to other things, it's nothing. You know, drivers don't get what they should get on some of the big events. That's just part of it. That's because, you know, maybe the money isn't there, but I go off and do other things, which is my living. But whenever I can, I'll always do stock car racing because I enjoy it, and I enjoy the people. And you know, a couple of times I've said, no, that's it. I've finished. I'm not doing any more. It's time for someone else to do it. And then normally about 6 months later or 3 months later, a phone call comes. Can you come back? It's not the same. And you end up thinking, oh, okay, I suppose I could go back and do something. But yeah, it's just in the blood, and it's the same for me. And yeah, my dad stopped going probably 15 years ago. I mean, he stopped marshalling because of age, but he kind of got me into it. And it's that generation thing, even not racers, but, you know, elsewhere. So, and I've probably, sadly for racing fans, probably got a couple of years left yet, unfortunately.
And luckily this isn't going to happen, but obviously if I looked at things, but if all tracks were forced to close because of this, you know, what would that mean?
I don't know. I think it would completely change things. I guess if it was as drastic as that, and venues closed, you would just have to get used to life of watching on telly, and that would be sad in one respect. You know, I think there are benefits for it. You know, there are no doubt there are benefits. I mean, we've spoken about the pluses and the minuses of Spedeworth TV. There's no doubt. You know, if I was going racing and I'd got a family, you know, maybe in October, November, or over the winter period, if there was a decent Saturday night meeting, of course you want to be there, but actually you might have something else that weekend or that day where there's, you know, you can do, or you'd like to do, which you can go and do. And then on the Saturday night, you can, you know, all sit around the fire with a takeaway and watch the racing on telly. Now, there's loads of pluses in that. particularly for those meetings that are a couple of hours away. So there is definitely a future for racing on telly. The mix for me is nice. I think, there's nothing like being racing. There are a lot of people that say to me, oh yeah, but you don't get the noise, you don't get the smells, you don't get the energy of it all. And that's absolutely right. But like I've said, that's the same in any sport I've done, whether I've been, at Lord's, at Twickenham or Wembley. You never get that same buzz. You always hear there's an atmosphere, but you don't actually experience it. Thankfully, I don't think this would ever be an issue, because hopefully normality is not too far away. But could racing survive without it? Arguably, yes, it could, but I think it would take an awful lot away from it. And I think the ideal mix would be that actually people can have the mixture of going when they want to, or actually this week we'll stay at home. If you're a family and you're going to go racing, it might cost you 100 quid, 120 quid by the time you've gone. Would you then say, if you've got to pay 30 quid to watch it at home, is that extortionate? Well, in comparison, it's probably not. The other thing people say is that if they've got younger kids, it's part of the family. They leave a stock car track at 10 o'clock. If they've got a 2-hour journey, they don't get back till midnight. If you're sat watching it at home, you can watch the racing, put the kids straight to bed. So there are positives from it to come. And I think, me personally, having been involved in the racing, obviously I'm a little bit biased because I'm involved with Spedeworth TV, but I think one of the big pluses of the COVID has been able to say that actually there is a market for a TV channel to go alongside the racing. So, I wouldn't like to think that we would ever get to that stage, but could it survive without? It probably could, but it would take a lot of mind persuasion, I think.
And finally, there have been provisional fixtures for Vauxhall. How big a step forward is that?
I think fixtures it's very difficult because you want to give people something to look forward to, but you also don't want to give false hope. And the fixtures have been planned from mid-May. I think off the record, we're quite hopeful that we might actually get some racing before that, probably behind closed doors. But again, it's waiting on the councils to take government advice, which is due out this week, next week. Some venues are starting to reveal that they've got permission to race, from April. I think it's exciting because I think it would have been 5 months that have been no racing. People want to go back racing. They want to go and watch. They want to go and race. They want to go and be part of it. So I think it's important to have that. And I actually think probably, while it's frustrating to think that, here we are, end of March, that's still 6 weeks away. That's a long time, and a lot can happen in that. I think it's being sensible in the hope that actually that is something to look forward to. And then if we get something before then, it's even more of a bonus. But definitely, and let's hope that this roadmap that they've come up with does work, and by the middle of June, we can go back to having some sort of normality, because for Speed Weekend it would be immense. I'm not convinced, but I just hope that does work, and that will make a huge difference. But I think the fixtures is great because people can start to look forward to something, something that there is that light at the end of the tunnel, and that actually, you're going to get to see friends, you're going to get to see fellow racers, fellow officials, and get back to that normal world that we all crave.